And welcome to Kendrick and Dusty Talk Sports. We're having a special show this afternoon. Of course, we have a big game coming up on Saturday. U of L coming in at number 25, hosting number 10 Notre Dame. And we have a very, very special guest on, a former Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and the newest member of the DraftKings team, Mr. Mike Golick Jr. The Golicks that have joined forces to host a live daily studio show on DraftKings Network's Gojo and Golick will anchor DraftKings Network weekday morning shows from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Samsung TV Plus and DraftKingsNetwork.com. The show will also be available via audio wherever fans listen to podcasts, including on Spotify and Apple. First of all, Mike, thanks so much for joining us. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I'm an avid Dan Le Batard listener, and so I've been laughing at you for years.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's always funny how quickly you can tell where people have heard you before. And the Dan Le Batard Show listeners who have heard me in the context of Stu Gatz. And it's a very different context to meet someone than almost anything else possible. So I'm sorry for what you've heard. I'm trying to actively better. But again, when Stu Gatz is one of your mentors, it's really hard to overcome that coaching.
The fact that you admit that Stu Gatz is a mentor is amazing.
I made the mistake. I let him in the door, and now he's never going to leave here. He calls me all the time asking for favors. Anytime I call him back asking for advice, he wants money and then won't get back to me for 6 months. So I made my bed, and now I have to lie.
And now he's honorary Golick family now.
Yeah, exactly. Honorary Golick family member. We made him eat a family portrait of us live on air on his show, but we still don't invite him into any of the holidays. And you can best believe my dad and mom have not put him in the will yet, although he is trying and maybe even harder than my sister to try and get the inheritance.
I actually was listening to that show when it happened. That was the famous show where Dan was gagging on the radio.
Yes, yeah. Dan's had to watch Stu Gatz openly flirt from their marriage bed, and I was the something on the side. I was the woman on the side for Stu Gatz that he used to make Dan jealous. But no, it somehow worked out for all of us. I love Stu Gatz. It's always good to see him. But those guys now, even that they're on their own and with DraftKings, even more unhinged than they used to be, which is saying something.
Right. So are you still the side piece, or how's this work?
I think, you know what, we've really kind of made it clear for everyone. Like, Dan and Stu Gatz are rock solid. They're always going to be there. But they have an understanding that when Stu Gatz needs a little bit of fun, keep things fresh, he can invite me into the marital radio bed, and I'm there to spice things up a little bit. And I've leaned into that role. I don't expect Stu Gatz to divorce Dan. I don't expect him to leave his wife right now. I understand exactly where I am in our relationship, and I'm comfortable with that.
That's fantastic, man. Also, your current show, you're working with your dad, which I'm sure Dan can give you plenty of advice on that. What's this going to be like working with Dad every morning? I love my dad to death. I couldn't imagine working with him every morning.
Yeah, it is funny. Dan Le Batard and I are about as opposite as two human beings can be in a lot of ways, but we do have that one common tie that binds and both getting to work with our dads. And, you know, for me, it's cool. I got to do it at ESPN at the end of our time there for the last probably 2.5 years when we were doing Golick and Wingo. I sort of snuck in through the back door and started hanging out with those two in the mornings. And it's nice. Honestly, it's a cool way to keep in touch with my parents even better, with my dad, you know, happens to be in 2 Radio Hall of Fames and is pretty good at this for a long time. It's a chemistry you can't replicate. I always tell people, Dad and Greeny worked together for 18 years, and you still can't replicate the chemistry when one of the hosts had to wipe the other's butt when he was a kid and teach him how to drive and do all that stuff. So it definitely creates a different bond there, but it's been a ton of fun to do. We're both excited.
Well, Mike, you know, we talk about what's coming up this week, and let's talk about another near and dear team to you, and that would be none other than Notre Dame. Obviously, you played for them for, you know, you look back in your history, you got some affiliation there. Going into this weekend, they're playing our boys. They're playing U of L in a top 25 ranked matchup here. I think just to start out, because there's a lot of storylines we could talk about, let's turn to the offense. You got 2 quarterbacks that find themselves ranked in the top 20 in the country. You got Hartman 16th, 1,400 plus yards. You got Plummer ranked 20th, 1,400 plus yards. It's going to be, in our eyes at least, is it going to be a shootout in your eyes when you look at this matchup coming up?
I mean, listen, if Louisville's going to have a chance to win this game and try and pull off this upset at home, then yeah, I think they'd like to have it be a shootout. I mean, we know the style of offense Jeff Brom wants to play and coach at his core and how often they want to air it out. And for Notre Dame, they've got some familiarity with Jack Plummer from his prior stop there, having played him when he was at Cal. So yeah, I think there's certainly the possibility for that. The limiting factor, I would say, has been Notre Dame's defense that's coming off one of their better games against Duke on the road, where Notre Dame's offense was a bit banged up, struggled to move the ball against that Mike Elko coach Duke defense that you guys know well inside the ACC here. And it really ended up being on the shoulders and on the legs of that Notre Dame defense that played really well for a lot of the year, squared up well with Ohio State when they came to South Bend. But I thought especially last week stood on their head, came up with some big stops, and have an ability that Notre Dame hasn't had often in my lifetime because of cornerbacks like Benjamin Morrison, who was an All-American last year and should be in line for that again this year, to strap up, play man coverage, and really challenge guys that way and allow them to get after the quarterback sending blitzes without as much fear of what goes on behind them. So could be a similar formula to what Louisville saw against NC State. I know Dave Dorn and company brought the heat, especially on third down. I would expect a lot more of that same game plan for Notre Dame to try and keep it from getting to a shootout.
That's right. Because, I mean, how much can, watching that NC State game defensively for NC State, I mean, they blitzed and they blitzed and they blitz again. It doesn't feel like Notre Dame blitzes that much, but will they up their blitzes more because of the pressure they was able to get on Plummer last week?
Man, Notre Dame does like to blitz a lot. Al Golden, if you ask any Notre Dame fans there, linebacker blitzes are that man's love language. And when you look, that's part of the way that NC State was able to have success. And you saw, even looking back at some of the other games to start the season, you hear them called simulated pressures a lot. Georgia's really well known for them. A lot of defenses in college football where you get a lot of guys up near the line of scrimmage, and then you end up only rushing 4, but they're coming from odd directions. You got 3 down linemen and a linebacker rushing, and you mix it up and try and play with the lines of the eyes of the offensive lines. And I think at times Louisville's had some issues sorting that. I actually really like Louisville's offensive line. I think they play really clean football. I think they maximize their physical ability. You see 5 guys working as one. And so I think the blitz is one of those ways, if you're Al Golden, you can challenge what's a really strong unit by trying to make them aware of a lot of things at once, and then seeing if you can get some free hitters running at Jack Plummer and try and get him off his spot where, when bothered, can become a little bit accurate on some of those downfield passes that we saw him hit in the course of last week to Chris Bell.
One thing that we kind of look at here, and of course this is with DraftKings, so we're going to go straight to your guys' book over here. And right now the spread at 6.5 points. Are you taking Notre Dame with the points? Obviously, you look at the matchup here; it's over 54, under 54 as well. Where are you headed with that, as far as kind of knowing that Notre Dame's offense has been, for the most part, pretty consistent up until that matchup against Ohio State? They got a little stifled there.
Yeah, and I think even last week, too, for Notre Dame, they went into that Duke matchup banged up without 2 of their better receivers. Jaden Greathouse, who's a freshman who's played really strong ball for them this year, and then Jaden Thomas, one of their more versatile wide receivers. And outside of Mitchell Evans, their tight ends, which, surprise, surprise, Notre Dame finds another tight end who can go out there and make some spectacular plays at tight end U. I think now those guys should be back healthy this week. That should help that offense. And you're right about the Ohio State game. That was one that certainly the offense was a bit more stifled than we had seen, but they had still been able to move the ball on the ground pretty consistently in that game. The Duke game bloodied their nose a little more than I think they were expecting. They were able to pull out a win, but Duke, especially along the lines of scrimmage, I thought really had a great advantage against Notre Dame during the course of that game. And so I think there's going to be a renewed emphasis on that. Audric Estime, who's one of the best running backs in college football, is a guy who made a big play late for the Irish in that game with a deep backfield. I would expect them to come out there and really try and open this offense back up again compared to what we've seen the last couple of weeks. And I would probably take Notre Dame in the points in this one.
When you look at Louisville's offense, obviously Jawar Jordan and Jamari Thrash stand out to them. When you see those two play, I mean, I've looked at their speed. Just looks different. You know what I mean? It just looks different especially when they get out in the open field, especially Jamari Thrash. Has Notre Dame seen the kind of speed that those two have?
I think to an extent. I mean, maybe overall speed not, but checking Marvin Harrison Jr. one-on-one makes for a long day. I mean, they're not going to see a better wide receiver room than the Ohio State wide receivers they saw in South Bend. And they had to have a plan for them. And it's going to be the same case here because you're right, with guys like Thrash, with guys like Jordan, what Louisville wants to do, number one, is the usual air raid stuff. They're going to spam you with mesh, crossing routes, going across the field, try and get picks, easy spots. And like anyone from the air raid tree, these wide receivers are really savvy. They find holes in the zones. They get able to run away from man coverage, but they also want to use the whole width of the field. And what Louisville, I think, is going to do is try and test the tackling on the perimeter for Notre Dame. And when you look at what this Notre Dame defense has struggled with, especially in the lead up to that Ohio State game, was tackling. They were a team that was near the bottom half of college football, according to Pro Football Focus's tackling rankings going into that game. I think it's improved some anecdotally over the last couple of weeks, but I think that's still an area, especially with players that caliber. Notre Dame's good at keeping everything in front of them, but if you can still eat up yards and try and take short yard plays, easy swings, and turn them into 5, 10, 15-yard gains and eat up some first downs, that's an area where, based on what Notre Dame struggled with this season, Louisville could use that kind of speed to try and exploit.
Mike, we want to switch gears here. We got another matchup, a huge top 20 matchup. Kentucky on the road at Georgia. We're looking at DraftKings as we speak right now. And Kentucky is getting 14.5 points. That's the spread at the moment. They're getting 14.5. Are you taking the 14.5? Do you think Georgia, who wasn't sharp last week, obviously struggled on the road at Auburn, do they have a much more complete performance this week against a Kentucky team that's undefeated?
So for my other job, I actually call college football games for Learfield Audio, College Football Saturday Night, the national radio broadcast. And I'm on the call for this one, so I can't pick it for you. But what I can tell you is I am very interested to see what this Georgia offense looks like going up against what's been really solid under Mark Stoops the entire time. You know the floor you're going to get defensively for that football team and what they can do. And for Georgia right now, because of injury, the running back room has been decimated by injury going into this season. Ladd McConkey, who was your second leading receiver from last year and has one of the more hilarious names in football for a guy that routinely sauces people in the open field, you missed him for the first 4 games with a back injury. He just got back finally in some action in the Auburn game this last week. And so it's been, hey, how many ways can we get our star tight end the ball? How many different ways can we get Brock Bowers the football? And that's not to say it wasn't the same way last year in the prior regime and prior offensive coordinator and Todd Monken, but it's looked even more highlighted this season. And he's been up to the task, but I am still curious to see now, all right, as they get a little bit healthier at wideout and get some guys back, what is it going to look like? And then on the other side, Georgia's defense, while not the 2021 group, and maybe not even the 2022 group in terms of top-end talent overall, is still one of the best coached units in football, is still a top 15 defense and scoring defense, one of the top defenses in third down defense. What are they going to do, especially now that this Kentucky rushing attack rolls in, really feeling itself after a phenomenal game from Ray Davis last week? He was one of my favorite running backs to study when he was at Vanderbilt. And coming over, the combination of him, offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, making his way back to Lexington, and then Devin Leary, a veteran quarterback coming over from NC State. This was a fascinating offense that went out and put it on a Florida team enthusiastically this last weekend, but now is going to get a decided step up in the challenge, this Georgia defense. So good on that side of the ball. And then I think one of the first real true tests for the Georgia offense that's going to need to carry more of its load because you maybe don't have a generational defense on the other side for once.
Mike, I was at that Florida Kentucky game. When, as an offensive lineman, when you get that much of a push against a team, I mean, Florida in the past has dominated that series, but Kentucky's won the last 3 in a row. When you dominate like that, how much confidence can you get from that going into that next game, knowing you're facing the toughest battle that you faced all season?
A ton, because remember, Florida was statistically one of the best defenses in college football going into that matchup, and they smacked them around pretty good. And you guys know it's way more personal when it's the run game, right? It's a knife fight versus a gunfight there. When you're up close and personal, and you're the old line, the Joe Moore line is, there's no greater feeling than moving a man from point A to point B against his will. And that's offensive line play at its best. But as much as anything, too, seeing Ray Davis and what he's capable of gives you so much confidence as a lineman. I always joke when I'm calling games, I sound way better when the game is good. Well, when I was blocking for guys, it's amazing how much better I look with a running back who understands how to set his guys up, who's always going to be in the right spot, who's not afraid to get up inside and hit those tough holes that are there while you're working and trying to pry guys out. And so I think the confidence for the unit comes when you know you've got a special player behind you who, if you just give him that sliver, you give him that window, he's going to be able to make something special out of it.
Like, one of the funniest things I saw in that game is just before half, the Florida defensive linemen were talking trash to Ray Davis. Now, what could you possibly have to say when you've given up 200 yards rushing to one guy in one half?
You know, sometimes, and I learned this having a lot of buddies that were defensive backs, sometimes you got to try and talk yourself into believing you're actually better than you are. I've seen plenty of guys will themselves beyond their circumstance with an attitude that is uncommon. And in this case, it didn't work. And unfortunately, like we saw with that, I don't know if you guys saw that video Oregon put out after the Colorado matchup, where they had all those Colorado players on wax talking cash junk. And it came back to bite them pretty hard in that game. Sometimes you're going to live by the sword. Sometimes you're going to die by the sword. Florida did a little bit of dying by the sword there, but I admire the confidence. I was always way too tired to talk smack. I was letter words and then trying to get back to the huddle and catch my breath so I could go out there and hang on for dear life the next play.
Yeah, Lanning sent a message there. I want to talk quickly about the over-under here. It's at 49. Do you envision that this is going to be a low-scoring affair? Of course, you saw that Georgia had a hard time sustaining drives in this past week, but you get the home field. Kentucky, at the start of the year, it seemed like their offense couldn't put anything together. You mentioned, though, Leary is starting to kind of, at least to a degree, put things together. I think the running game, just matching up with the fact that they've figured out who their lead back is, that helps with Davis. But do you see this being over under 49? Kind of where do you see that at this time?
I definitely think it skews towards a lower scoring game as we're still kind of finding out a lot about these teams. And I think it's a good reminder on one side and really on both sides, there's been a lot of change. And so everyone's still feeling everyone out. Mike Bobo takes over for Todd Monken, who had been there for the back-to-back championship wins and is now trying to install his version of the offense, do it with a new quarterback in Carson Beck, do it with all the injuries that we mentioned. And on the other time, I mean, the Kentucky Wildcats are the perfect portal era example. We said, all right, we got a quarterback we think we like. We got a coordinator that wants to come back from the NFL who knows us enough. And then we got a running back who can come over. And while college football in certain stops has made it seem easy to put together, I can promise you there's still stuff they're learning each and every week. And so I think you combine that with the fact that I think Georgia's defense, especially where Kentucky is going to want to hit them, is still really good. Like running into the teeth of that Georgia defense is still not an advisable task for the faint of heart. And so I'm fascinated to see it, but I have to imagine points are going to be tough to come by in this one. And you're going to see offenses have to earn every square inch.
Mike, outside of the two games we've talked about, what stood out about this season so far? I know Deion got so much attention at Colorado and well-deserved, and they played well for those first few games and actually played well in the second half on Saturday. But aside from those storylines that everybody's been talking about, what has stood out to you so far this season?
Well, I mean, I know, listen, this is something that everyone's still talking about, but Texas is back and kind of in the ways that actually matter, right? I got to call the Texas-Alabama game on radio in week 2, and seeing the way they operate in the trenches now, what they've been able to build on the offensive and defensive lines now in year 3 under Steve Sarkisian is really special. We always think of Sark as this incredible play designer, what he's got there with Xavier Worthy and what we're doing with Quinn Ewers at quarterback, and is Arch Manning going to get in? And it's like, hey, guys, look up front. And guys like Kelvin Banks, their left tackle, and on the other side, Tavondre Swift and some of these defensive tackles, they've got some big burly boys going out there and making plays right now. So I think Texas, I think the Pac-12 on the top end is such a gift this year. From the middle of October through November, we're going to get to watch Washington, Oregon, USC, Utah, Oregon State, all these top flight teams go out there and play each other. It's an absolute round robin from hell for these teams if you're trying to get a clear-cut winner into the college football playoff. But, man, it's entertaining for all of us. And so fascinated to watch that. And real quietly, guys, the ACC coming into the season was billed to us as Florida State and Clemson. I was one that had Clemson in the college football playoff and have since looked kind of bad. But I still think that defense is a championship caliber defense. But offensively, we know the things they've been trying to churn through. You look up at the rest of the ACC, Duke got dealt a tough blow with the Riley Leonard high ankle sprain. That's going to affect their production going forward, but they still haven't lost in the ACC. You've got Miami and what they've done earlier in the season. Big out-of-conference win against Texas A&M. You've obviously got Florida State at the top of all of this. And then you've got North Carolina and Drake May. So you look around, the ACC quietly a little bit deeper conference than I think people would have given it credit for to start the season. And then you bring up a team like NC State, like Louisville, all these teams that are going to be tough outs, and Louisville now ranked in the top 25. I think that conference has a lot more to be proud of than maybe some would have anticipated going into this year.
Okay, so staying power here, because we're talking, on the grand scheme of things. Louisville fans and Kentucky fans, they want to honestly know, where do you see them as teams in the rankings? Do you see them as top 25 teams, top 20? What is the ceiling for these teams? Kind of take me through both of those. Where do you see Louisville first, then Kentucky?
I think for Louisville, they could be a top 25 team firmly this year. I really like Jeff Brom. I like what he was able to do during his time at Purdue. He's got a clear-cut identity, and anytime you can coach to something like that, where more often than not, reps are going to be the teacher, I think he's displayed a real aptitude for raising the floor of a team. And, you got a quarterback that you can trust there. They've got all the makings of it. So I think they can be in that mix. Kentucky, I think if things go right with the formula that we talked about here, that can be a top 20, top 15 team. What Mark Stoops has done in that program, and quite frankly, just the job there in general, what you're paid, the conference you play in, and the fact that the expectations aren't as inordinate and otherworldly as they are in the rest of the Southeastern Conference, has created a chance for them to lay groundwork for something that's got real staying power. Kentucky can be very consistently good year to year. I don't know if they can be a top 10 team with the current roster. I don't know, post what they had in 21 with Will Levis and Liam Cohen and that top end combination, that great line, and Wan'Dale Robinson and all the guys they had there. But Mark Stoops has got them to the point where when they're in the top 25 and top 15 consistently, I'm not all that surprised.
Now, Mike, as a Levitar Show disciple, I'm assuming that you love all of the chaos that's going on right now. I mean, how much do you love the chaos? Because we don't really know who's going to. Because usually by this time we pretty much know who's going to be in that Final Four. To maybe the fourth spot's up in question, but we at least know the top three. This year it's wide open. I'm imagining you love this chaos.
Oh, it's incredible. And a time where we spent the whole offseason talking about conference realignment and playoff expansion. You've got the Pac-2 teams that are left in the heap over there, Washington State, Oregon State, falling out, playing great games. Coach Dickert's out here talking his talk, getting back at everybody in the media. You've got the rest of the Pac-12 with maybe the four of the best quarterbacks in college football, at least three of the best quarterbacks in college football, in a conference that's probably not going to exist next year. I just think overall, yes, the chaos is healthy for the sport. It's a lot of fun. It still includes largely the same names as you would expect. But we got to a point that I think very few people were confident we would ever get back to, which is you've got questions at quarterback at a couple of the biggest schools in the country, right? Alabama doesn't have a future first rounder and Heisman Trophy winner there in Jalen Milroe anymore. Ohio State's breaking in a new quarterback right now in Kyle McCord. On and on down the list. Clemson finally seems to have also taken a step back from an historic heater at that position. And so it's opened up a lot of free space at the top of the sport that we've seen programs like Texas now in year 3. We mentioned what's gone on out in the Pac-12 with some of the really competent coaching hires there. Kalen DeBoer at Washington, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Lincoln Riley at USC. You spread the love at a lot of these places. And so now there's teams that have gone that route and been building up. There's the Florida States of the world that wanted to fire their coach really bad for a while, couldn't financially, and now let him stick around long enough to build a program with a competent veteran quarterback. There's a lot of ways to win in college football this year, and I think that's exciting for those of us that talk about and study the game, but it's definitely exciting for fans.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. I know you got a heart out right now. Thank you so much for joining us, doing it, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Absolutely, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. And that's going to do it for Dusty and I. We will be back. We may do this again Thursday. See.
We'll be back Thursday.
Yeah, we'll see.
Either way.
All right. But thanks again for joining us. This is Kendrick and Dusty Talk Sports. Thanks again to Mike Golick Jr.
Mike Golick Jr.
And DraftKings for making that available. We had fun. And he was awesome.
Yeah, he's great. His insight is fantastic. Obviously, if you use the app, take notes, because this is the important stuff that people want. And
right.
I tell you what, that spread, the 14.5 points in the Kentucky game, that is yelling at me right now.
Right. That's a big spread. Because that game, they've talked about it. That game is always extremely physical.
Yeah.
Kirby Smart talked about it in his press conference yesterday. That game between Kentucky and Georgia is always extremely physical. It's one of the most physical games that both teams play, and they both admit it. And so 14 points, that's a big spread, especially when Georgia's still breaking in a new quarterback. UK is coming off their best performance of the season. I think I may have to take the points on that one.
I think when you look at the U of L and Notre Dame matchup, one thing that I'm just super excited about, and we talked about it a little bit, is that quarterback matchup. I mean, quite frankly, you have two quarterbacks that rank in all of the statistical categories, right? And in the top 20, Plummer is kind of outplayed a little bit by Hartman, and Hartman has been, outside of really the last, I would say, game against Ohio State, even against Duke, he looked pretty sharp. So I'm curious to watch what this U of L defense can do. I will say, and we haven't mentioned his name yet, but Ashton Gelati, he ranks 5th right now. With 5 sacks, Cameron Kelly, 2 interceptions. Those might be key players in this game that we haven't really at least thrown out there. Keep an eye on them because they've been the impactful defensive players for U of L. They're going to have to step up if they want to stop this Notre Dame offense. That Duke, I mean, for about 3 quarters and 14 minutes, they were able to do that. And you saw Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State does that, right? So a little more surprising seeing Duke do that.
If you're the Louisville defense, though, you draw a ton of confidence from last season when they absolutely destroyed Sam Hartman at L&N Stadium, or whatever it was called at the time. When they destroyed Wake Forest last year, I think they had 6 turnovers. It was insane. Yeah, it was fumbles and turnovers. It was his worst game of his career. So if you're the Louisville defense, you have a lot of confidence, but at the same time, Sam Hartman probably remembers that too. And so he's probably going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder coming into that game on Saturday night. I will be there.
Yeah, you will.
And I will have all your highlights, and we'll have a post-game reaction on Wave Sunrise on Sunday morning because that game will end so late. But we'll be out there and having a little fun in the tailgate before.
Yes, we will. And looking forward to seeing both these games. Like, talk about a great weekend. I mean, 2 of the biggest games in recent history for both programs. I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening. And once again, thanks to Michael Jr. for joining us, because that was some fantastic insight.
Right. I guess the first time ever that both Kentucky and Louisville have been 5-0 at the same time in the same season. That's awesome. Football has been great around here. Of course, we have Touchdown Friday night on Friday night. Our game of the week will be Trinity visiting Ballard, huge district matchup. We'll also have St. X Manuel, Bullitt East, Fern Creek. A ton of great games, ton of great football action. And of course, the Sunday NFL action, which I will be on the couch watching TV all day.
It's a much nicer week, I would say, on paper than maybe what we had last week.
Yeah,
last week was tough.
Leaps and bounds.
It's going to look nice. So we're excited for that. A lot going on. This is when everything picks up, and best of luck to U of L and UK fans, because we know that Saturday is the day that your team's going to show you what their true colors are.
Any chance they root for each other's teams? I mean, they are 5-0 representing the state.
Okay, as a TCU alum, so that way I don't stay biased here. People don't think I'm biased here. Right? As a TCU alum, you actively root against Texas. You just do, right? And if we had time with Golick Jr., I would have asked him, what do I do with myself? I would have just said, hey, simply, we just lost to West Virginia. Do I jump into
my man's dead inside.
Yeah, I'm in pain. Thank you to the Dodgers for keeping me alive. But I will say this, TCU fans will root for Texas. They'll root for Oklahoma. Baylor, they probably never will, though. But it's you want the best matchup, right? You want the best matchup. And can you just dream this up? This is dreaming, but both teams undefeated facing off against each other. I mean,
it would be amazing. It would be an amazing crowd at L&N Stadium. I'm going to go out on a limb and say there will be very small segments of each fan base that will kind of root for the other one because of the state pride, but it'll be very
tiny.
Very minor.
What percentage?
0.0035.
We're talking that small. Okay. Yeah, I can see that as well. This is a great rivalry, but would love to see that game with top. I mean, who knows? Top 10.
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the schedules, U of L will probably come in with a better record.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's going to be a great game, and I'm just excited to see a great game again because it's been a while since that game has really been good. It'd be good to see the rivalry get back to where it should. Speaking of rivalries, Kentucky and Indiana renewing the basketball rivalry. They will play the first game in Rupp, the next game in Lucas Oil, going back to Rupp. Then finally in 2028, Kentucky will return to Assembly Hall in Bloomington.
What a huge
they
moment
have not
that
played
would be,
in the regular season since Christian Watford shot in 2011.
That's insane.
That's a rivalry that should never go away.
No.
And you're too young to remember. Back in the day when I was a kid, they used to play the Big Four Classic in the old Hoosier Dome.
When would they do that?
They would do it. It's like in December.
December, okay.
And it would be Louisville versus either IU or Notre Dame or Purdue, and then Kentucky. It's Kentucky and Louisville versus in a round robin. It was always Indiana. Then it was a round robin between the Notre Dame and Purdue.
Yeah,
and they would play that thing in the Hoosier Dome. They should bring that back and play that thing in Lucas Oil. It would be amazing. It would be amazing for fans around here.
Yeah, no doubt.
All the fans could get there. It would be a great thing to bring back. But we've taken the first step.
I would love to see that. That would be I mean, you talk about how big of a deal basketball regionally is. Like to have all those pieces, all those programs together again. I mean, they're doing these type. I mean, it's not unheard of, right? Like
they used to do this all the time in the late 80s and early 90s. And so I don't know why they can't bring it back. They can. Yeah. It's just a matter of everybody sitting down, getting a room and having.
You have the San Diego Classic, right? Like you have obviously
if they did, because I even had the wild idea if they didn't do that, have an interstate rivalry with Kentucky, Louisville, Bellarmine, Murray, Moorhead, Western Kentucky. Yeah. You can figure out how to do that. You can have them all 1 year in Rupp and have them all 1 year at the Yum Center. I think it would be a great thing. These are great ideas. I'm an idea man, but I have no idea how to make the plans for that.
At U of L basketball. Listen, that would be pretty cool.
The powers that be. But that's what we're gonna do is here for tonight. We may do this again on Thursday. We'll see. You'll know if we do. And for my man Dusty Baker, I'm Kendrick Haskins, and we will see you later this week.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Breaking down all the biggest games in our area. This is Sports Talk with Kendrick and Dusty on Wave Now. Delivered by Verno's Pizza. Yeah, it's that good.